I'm Jen Valenga, and this is the Ditch Your Backup Plan podcast. Stories of rewarding careers between starving artist and celebrity to inspire listeners to follow a risky career path. I interview people in the arts and related fields who have ditched their backup plan.
Success is what you determine it to be. It's not money. It's not prestige. If you're doing something that you really love and the rest of your needs are met, then that's okay. It's okay to be content and to share that with other people.
Today features Damian Taylor. He's the co-founder of Prometheus Digital Studios, where they help their clients take data to help their clients reach their desired audience. Today is February 23rd, 2021, and this is episode 45. I can't even believe it. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad to have you listening. If you're returning, welcome, fearless friends. I'm glad to have you back. Newbies can head over to Facebook, where we have a group called Fearless Friends, and I try my best to share some added bonuses that are related to each episode. February is Black History Month, and while I'm on sabbatical, Kansas State University is still continuing with the Kansas Theater Works podcast, and they are releasing Jazz District, a play by Logan Stacer, directed by Darrington Clark, voiced by students in the theater program. I'd love for you to check out Kansas Theater Works Jazz District episode, Thursday, February 25th. I've been reflecting on my interview with Damian. He talks about his grandfather and how he made his wealth with a janitorial business, which he says at the time his grandfather was a working man. That was the kind of industry he could get into, but he did very well with it. And I'm reflecting on what Damian is doing now, how entrepreneurial that is, but how also very modern, that he is looking at data analytics for creative content on the internet. Just such an amazing legacy, but also reminds me how fast the world is moving. I hope you'll do something to educate yourselves on Black History Month. I want to give a shout out to my students in Ebony Theater and say I'm honoring you and the work of all Black artists during February for Black History Month. This is a really interesting interview. Damian educated me on so much. And if you're inspired by what he talks about, he means it when he says email him. If you have questions and this seems like an interesting career path for you, please reach out to Damian. I know he'd love to hear from you. Here's my interview with Damian Taylor. Hi, Damian. How are you today?
Hi, Jen. I'm doing great. Thank you.
You're the co-founder of Prometheus Digital Studio, and it's a scientific method for content. I know that you do content creation, digital strategy, online marketing. So talk to us a little bit about what that means and what's different about your company.
Yeah, so Prometheus Digital is different in that everybody makes content in some form. But what we do is really use data to help us prioritize and optimize the content that we're making. So a lot of times you'll get the data and people doing testing after everything's already made. We actually start testing from the very beginning, testing our concepts, making sure we're figuring out who the audience is, so that when we make it, we know who we're making it for and what they like, and we can make sure that we're really honing the stories that we're telling for the audience that we want to reach.
And what kind of content are you mostly making? I mean, we connected because of our podcasts, but I know you're doing podcasting, but what are you mostly doing in your company?
So we actually have two sides of the company. There's the consulting and strategy piece, which is helping other people make content and be strategic about it. So that's anything from helping them make the right videos to making enough videos or making sure that they're putting it on the platform where their audience is. And then the other side is the actual production piece. And so we've been really focused lately on sci-fi, fantasy type of content. But of course, since a lot of filming can't happen, it's been podcasts. And so we've been really, really heavy now in this world of scripted fantasy sci-fi podcasts, which has been a fun adventure for sure.
Oh, cool. So who are your clients usually?
We have sort of the small digital studios who could be our clients. It could be like a news client. We just recently started working with the Young Turks Network to help them kind of get their audience reporting. So that's more of a reporting consulting thing. But then we also have sometimes networks. So I've worked with Full Screen Media, Warner Media, um, CW agencies. So it can really span the gamut, but it's pretty much anyone who's making content. We've even worked with small local brands who are trying to promote their content on Facebook or Instagram.
You know, I think we all keep thinking about the fact that the pandemic has caused some companies to tank and some companies to really blossom, and it doesn't feel like there's a whole lot in between. Where do you fit in there?
We're kind of probably straddling a little of both. At the very beginning, we tanked. Literally, we were all excited getting this really huge client. We had this really big, ambitious project that was on our plate, and we were thinking, yeah, we're going to do this thing, and it's going to be so innovative and so different, and we're going to revolutionize everything in media. And then the pandemic, maybe about 2 months into it, we were doing the contract negotiation, and they had to lay off most of their team and said,
Oh,
yeah, we're not spending money anymore. We can't do this project. And we're like, uh-oh, we don't have a plan B. We're just kind of stuck with no money. So,
yeah.
I mean, for like a good 6 months, just nothing. So we tanked for a while, but then at the end of last year, finally, after lots and lots of legwork and kind of clawing our way back, we've been growing again.
A lot of hustle. Yeah. So what are you
Oh
working
yeah.
on right now?
We have a lot of consulting projects going on, a lot of consulting projects, and then we're going to be wrapping up the first season of our Tech Witch podcast, which I'm really excited about. It's the first time I got to be the writer on something, so yeah, very
Yes,
exciting.
yes. Tech Witch is a great podcast. So, before we get into Tech Witch, I want you to talk about that because I think that some of the actors that listen will be really interested in that, and I want to know about where you get your actors and all that. But where are you calling from?
I am calling from Thousand Oaks, California.
And are you a California native?
I am one of the few born and bred, third generation actually. Both of my parents were, and then my grandmother was as well.
Oh wow, wow. Okay, so Thousand Oaks is in the outside of LA.
Yep, just northwest of LA.
Okay, cool. So talk about Tech Witch. How's it going, and how did it start?
It's going great. I think Tech Witch is probably the perfect show to talk about for this podcast because we had to ditch our backup plan
Mm-hmm.
to make it happen. But it's great. It started as an idea because I'm a big dork, I'm a big geek, and I love sci-fi and fantasy content. And I was trying to figure out, is there a way to blend the two? I think Star Wars kind of does it, but I wanted to see, like, is there a way where I can have both of those in one piece of content? And so Tech Witch was it. It's about a pair of twins who discover that they're from a family of witches, but most witches control nature. They don't. Everyone thinks they don't have power until they discover that their power is based in the man-made world. So they can control technology and the things around them. So the more technologically advanced we become, the stronger they get.
Cool. And how long has that been going?
So we're 9 episodes in. So it's been about 5 months. So this is our first season for Tech Witch, and we're 3 more episodes to go before the finale, and we're already working on season 2. So super excited.
Oh, what size of team do you have working on it?
This is a really small team. We wanted to do something that was nimble and lean. So the core team is only 3 of us actually. And then I'm kind of moonlighting as writer, editor, music director, everything else that needs to be filled in the gaps.
Now, remind me, are you a musician to start? Tell me your journey, like you're ditching the backup plan and your studies. How did you get your start?
So I had an unconventional start, to say the least. I've always been both left and right brain. So I majored in neurophysiology, but I minored in English literature and music. And so I've always kind of played in both worlds, which is how I ended up in the entertainment industry doing basically data and analytics. So I'm doing data analytics for creative work. And following
Amazing.
that,
That's amazing. That's so
it's weird,
cool.
right?
Yeah. No, I mean, that's what you need. We need you.
It's been fun because I it's one, not very many people do it, and so I get to use both sides of my brain, which makes me feel really happy and fulfilled. But it also means that I get to do some things that other people don't get to do, and I think about things differently. So after working in studios for so long, I realized that I really liked creating, but I kept getting boxed in with, "But you're the numbers guy. Stay over there." Um, People didn't like having someone who played in both camps, and so I went to smaller companies that allowed me to do both and figured this is great. I could do both, but they were small and they were easily acquired or shut down or whatever. And so that was a little unstable. And because of that, my business partner and I, who'd worked together for, I think, 3 or 4 startups together. We got laid off one more time at a company that got acquired. We're like, oh, not again. And then we decided we keep making all these companies money. Why don't we just do this for ourselves this time?
There you go. Yep.
And so that's what we did. We started doing it for ourselves, and now I can, be as creative or analytical as I would like. And I now have a podcast. I'm getting to hang out with all these actors, and I'm writing screenplays, which is something I never thought I'd be doing. So it's awesome.
And Prometheus Digital is the company you created once you were laid off that final time?
Yep, it is. It is. It's funny, the name, even at the time, I was really big into a podcast about Greek mythology called Let's Talk About Myths, Baby. It's awesome. And so I was really big into Greek mythology. Well, I still am. But I had been deep into the story about Prometheus. And so him being the sort of the champion for people, not only giving them knowledge, but giving them fire and sort of always trying to help people. And I was like, that's a great name for our company, because like data is knowledge. So we're giving people knowledge. And fire, well, we don't have fire, but lights, we can do digital stuff. So close enough.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love it. And that started before or after the pandemic?
It started before the pandemic, but not too far before. So we were going full in, like, let's do this company in 2019, like June 2019. We're all in, and we started in April, but we didn't get all of our paperwork finished and incorporated, blah blah blah, until June. And we're excited, yes, and we're doing all this legwork and tapping into our networks. And then the beginning of the year, we're starting to get traction, and we're getting contracts and people negotiating with us. We're like, yeah, we're in. And then pandemic, and everyone said, never mind, we're going to hold off. You guys are really new, and we need to save money. So, yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, hustling back to where you want to be now, I'm sure.
Oh, definitely. I think it was probably a good time to have, because it forced us to think about what we really wanted to do, and is this something you really want? But it also forced us to kind of decide, do you want to go back to work? Because we both were thinking, okay, we start looking for jobs in really soon. Or do you kind of burn the ships and stay on the island and make this work? And it was I think the right kick we needed to kind of make things work.
You've burned the ships.
Burned the ships, stayed on the island, and decided to make a go of it.
I love it. Cool. So when you decided to study all those different things in college, were you a smart science student who was interested in data analytics and neurobiology? How did you put together even that major and study program of study?
I just did it on my own. It's funny. I love neuroscience. I wanted to figure out how the body worked, and I loved figuring out why things happen the way they did in the body. But of course, I'd been in choir all through college or high school, and I had been in musicals. I had done some acting, and so all of those things were still very integral to things I loved, and I didn't want to really give it up. So I figured I could have my neuroscience, and then I can do English literature and music. And I told myself, worst case scenario, what'll happen is I will be the guy who can write science books by day and then, perform at a bar at night.
Would anybody have been disappointed if you followed a straight arts path?
Oh, for sure. My dad actually was very adamantly against me following an arts path of any sort. And I get it from his perspective. Growing up, he grew up in a fairly well-off family, but his dad, my grandfather, had to work really hard and built a business around doing the jobs no one wanted to do. He built a janitorial business that made them quite wealthy. In that, from my dad's perspective, you had to be an entrepreneur or you had to be in a STEM program of some sort, because the expectation was that every successful Black person was going to be a musician or an actor or what have you. I should preface that with where he grew up. So Ray Charles lived across the street from my dad. Tina Turner lived behind him. And so from his perspective, most of the people in his neighborhood who were really prosperous or wealthy were actors, musicians, producers of some sort. But there were very few who were in business or STEM. And so he was always saying, you have to have the business, you have to do that. And so even when I was a kid, I wanted to do piano lessons, and he actually forbade it. He didn't let me take piano lessons.
Wow.
Because he hated them when he was a kid, and he didn't want me to start going down a path of being a musician of some sort.
Is your dad still living?
He is. He's still living.
What does he think of what you're doing?
I don't think he fully understands what I'm doing. He knows that it's not all creative, but he also knows that there's some numbers in it. So I think he's pleased with that. Um, but he still, I don't think he fully wraps his head around like, what do you mean this digital analytics, audience development, something or other?
You know, this digital age is moving so fast. Like, even people who are aware of it can barely keep up. I think we will look back at this if we exist long enough with the climate change. But we will look back and say how fast this moved. I mean,
Oh
you
yeah.
can't keep up, really.
No,
Do you feel
it's so
that? I feel
fast.
that way, but I'm not a tech person. What do you think?
I'm a tech person and I'm the same way. I mean, just thinking about Facebook is not that old. YouTube is not that old. All of them are, like 10, 15, 20 years old. But then within there, it feels like every week there's TikTok, and TikTok is a new thing until Clubhouse comes along. Then everybody's all about Clubhouse. And so everything is moving so quickly.
It is. I mean, it's very hard to keep up. You have a little one. You have a 3-year-old, a little guy. And how so you and your wife are there in the LA area with a young son, and you're an entrepreneur and your new business and all of this. How does your lifestyle now with your family differ from how you grew up?
I love my lifestyle now because until now, actually, it was very similar to what my parents had done, where my dad would have very long commutes to work, sitting in traffic, and so he'd leave really early in the morning and then come back late at night because it took like 2 hours to get home or whatever. So he didn't get to spend a lot of time at home, and then on the weekends he's just exhausted because he's like he has to get stuff done for work and he wants to rest, and so there was very little sort of felt like flexible family quality time. It would happen, but it was in short bursts. But since starting our company, and even now, especially with the pandemic, for me at least, and my family, it was a really great thing because I was already working from home a lot, but now it meant my wife was at home and my son was at home. So all three of us got to be spend time together. And it was challenging at first, trying to juggling who's going to do a meeting or a phone call or whatever. But after a while, we got into a nice rhythm, and we go to the park. And so it's like every day going to a park or playing outside or just spending that time. I feel like it's a much better quality of life, and I feel like it's something that I don't know. It's giving me a new perspective and appreciation for those who are in my life, and I think it's kind of it was the right choice, versus going back to the okay, now we have to drive and do the 9 to 5 and get to wherever we're going.
And in LA, that is such a real thing. That commute is.
Oh, oh yeah. Uh,
So then when we talk about backup plans, did you have one? How do you define one? I mean, you said getting a 9 to 5 job, but
I think my backup plan was literally going back to work for a studio or a tech company to really do the same thing that I've always done. And it's the okay, you get to be the data guy, come in and you have to drive in and tell us what to do, and we may or may not listen, and then we'll blame you regardless. And it was just kind of a very repetitive, but I knew it was easy. I know that there are very few people who do what I do, so it was very tempting to go back to it. I even had people who I'd worked with previously who were calling, "We have a job. I really want you to take it." And it may have been for slightly less. I'm like, "Oh, but it's good enough, right?" And that temptation was very strong, and especially with COVID and all the uncertainty of, are we going to be able to find clients even? I don't know. We've been looking for 6 months and there's nothing. What do we do? And then even one of the consulting clients we had promising, "No, you'll consult, and after 3 months, would you like to just kind of end your company and work for us?" And again, it's tempting, thinking it could be more secure. Is it safer? And at the end of the day, realizing that it's not, because I've been laid off now 3 times or whatever for a company like that's not.
yeah, I
Uh,
mean, that safety is sometimes just all in your head. We've all felt that with the pandemic. Do you, I mean, without revealing any more than you want to reveal, do you feel that it's been, when you think about insurance and all of the things that you had, the overhead of a business, do you think it's been lucrative? Has it been equal or better than what you had before, or leading that direction?
I think after that dry spell of just panicking and my wife and I going, okay, so do we have to sell our house or do we not? Like we were actually planning, and we're like, well, when we have 3 months of cash left, we'll know to start selling, right?
Right. Yeah.
Luckily, we didn't have to go that far, but we were getting nervous. We were getting close, and we're just watching, like, oh. And I think for us, luckily, it's been now the business is profitable enough. We've made enough, close to what I would have made just working from another company. And um, since the end of last year, we've actually been picking up more clients, even so we're still growing, which is really positive and exciting. So I'm glad that we made that choice, and I actually see that the upside of what we can build and earn from this, not just even in terms of money, but in experience and just the people we'll meet, even is much greater than I would have if I had gone back to just working for another company.
Yeah, I mean, if you and your co-founder can both replace your income or nearly replace your income or your total benefits package with your income close to what you had before and can still live, it sounds to me like it's much more fulfilling for you anyway.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, at the end of the day, like at some point money is not really material. Like you can only have so much and spend so much. And I came to the realization last year during the pandemic that this whole idea of, well, we got to make more and then we can buy a bigger house. Like, we don't really need a bigger house. And do I want to clean more? No, I don't. And with more money comes more expense. Like, oh, now we need to pay someone to fix or like take care of this bigger yard because I won't have time to do that huge yard. And it just becomes a hassle. Whereas being able to just live and not have to commute and quality of life, that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make. Like, I'd much rather have the quality of life and be content and not have to worry than always stressed about getting more or making sure I'm making somebody's deadline for whatever reason or feeling like I owe them because now they're paying me so much.
Yeah, and that you're on that hamster wheel of trying to buy more because buying more equals a certain level of success. I think knowing what you need and want and which things are valuable to you is so important. And I think sometimes really good for young artists to hear that there are plenty of people creating in whatever way that are not on that race that sometimes is perceived when you're younger as being the only way to sort of prove your adulthood or
Mhm.
your viability in society, that you've met this certain status level. And that is all sort of in your mind.
Oh, totally. I completely agree. And the thing that it's sad it took me, well, it didn't take me this long to realize, but it took me this long to really formalize it and really commit to that understanding is that success is what you determine it to be. It's not money, it's not prestige. And at the end of the day, if you're doing something that you really love and the rest of your needs are met, then that's okay. It doesn't have to be something that's big and makes everybody else notice that you've done or achieved blah blah blah. Um, it's okay to be content and to share that with other people because now I have room to do other things. I started sewing during the pandemic. When have I ever had time to do something like sewing? My wife's been like, "Hey, I have some pants that need to be hemmed." I got it, right? Like,
How fun. That's fun. What has, let me ask this, what's been your biggest risk so far?
I I've taken a lot of risks in my life. I think I've gone through probably the last 10 years has been the least risk
Hmm.
um, prone that I've been. And I think that's part of what led.
Your company wasn't the biggest risk?
No, no. So early on in my career, I started off working in science completely. And I remember my first really full-time lab job doing science work. It just was, I was miserable. It was a miserable company. The people I worked with weren't very great. Well, the people I worked with were really great. The people I worked for were not very great. And I remember one day I came in and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I just put in my notice. I didn't have another job. I didn't have a backup plan. I just quit and just had to figure it out. So that was actually a pretty big risk. And then from there, I transitioned from being 100% pure science into doing marketing and analytics. And so that was a huge risk because there was no plan. Just I quit.
You knew that there was something more that fit you better that combined that science and art. Is that what was in you?
It's completely what it was. And I realized that at that point I was kind of doing the science thing because of what people told me I should be doing, right? Like to prove that I was really smart, I had to be a scientist. Otherwise people wouldn't take me seriously. And listening, I heard my dad in the back of my head, like, you have to be an entrepreneur or a scientist. Otherwise, like you can't go down this art path. And then I realized that there are plenty of ways to do that. And I don't need to care whether someone else thinks I'm smart or successful. If I'm okay with it, it's all that matters. It's something that not everyone does. And it's funny that it took me that long to realize it because even when I would get jobs every time I would go into a job, they're like, "Oh, we've been looking for a year and a half or 2 years for someone who could do this job." And I would wonder, why are you looking so hard? It's not like that. And I assumed that there were a lot of people doing that. And then during that dry spell we had last year, a recruiter reached out to me and asked, "Hey, would you be interested in this job? I don't really know much about it. This industry, it's new and it's burgeoning, but from what I can gather, there are probably 1,200 people in the world who are doing what you were doing." And I'm like, wow, that's some numbers behind it. Okay, like, and I think, wait a minute, if there are 7 billion people in the world, and he can only find 1,200 who do what I do, that means this is actually kind of rare. Um, and I realized, okay, this is something that I can really lean into, because if people are willing to look for me and search me out, and they're spending years doing it, then it must be a need that isn't being met, and it's something that I can do that's unique. So yeah.
How could somebody who's listening to this going, "Oh, I want to do what he's doing," what's their path to do what you're doing?
It's funny. I think there are several paths. There's not a clear line. I met a woman on through LinkedIn, actually, who's in a very similar position as me, but she came from the opposite end, where she was a producer, and had done a lot of production work, but had to understand how the shows and series that she was performing actually did, and what was driving the performance and who the audience was. So she started learning about the data and where she can get that information. And so both of us, coming from opposite ends of the spectrum, ended up at the same point, where now we both have this sort of structured creative process for both of us, where we can start to build out a process, and we can start to really analyze who's the audience, how are we making it, what does that mean in terms of plot line. So if what they really like is drama and romance, how do we bring that to life in our plots? And it really changes how you start to think about creative, and how you start to execute it, and how you even tell stories.
Is there some danger in I think what I'm hearing you say is that you're looking at what people want and respond to, and then giving them what they want because of what the data tells you. Is there any danger in giving too much of what people want without offering something they maybe don't know that they might want?
I think that's where it becomes interesting, because that's where art and science have to mix, right? You know that people really want X, but what'll surprise them is if you don't give them that. And so you have to start playing with that, and understand how audiences react when you don't give them what they want. And you can, I think, probably an easy example for a lot of people to understand is the first season of Game of Thrones. People who hadn't read the books
Spoiler alert if you haven't watched Game of Thrones.
we're thinking of a normal story arc, like, oh my God, Ned Stark is going to get in trouble, someone's going to save him, and there's going to be this battle thing. Nope, his head got lopped off, and that was the end. And it starts this whole thing, and people were just, wait, what? You got rid of a principal character, and they continue that arc throughout the books. They start to wane in that way, in the series a bit, but you didn't know if someone was really in peril or going to be there. People wanted more of this character, but because they loved Robb Stark, he got killed off. Sorry. But yeah, it's one of those things where once you realize what people want and what they like, it gives you the ability to then play with it and manipulate. Well, I hate to say manipulate people, but you can manipulate them a bit, right? You can set them up for what they think they're going to get. And when you change it, they're shocked, and it creates a new sensation of, oh, wow, wait, I don't know how to do this. So I think that's a misconception that a lot of people have, that they assume that once you know the stuff in the data, you're going to just start kind of creating by numbers. And it's actually the opposite. You actually know then what leverage you can pull, and how to kind of elicit the emotions or the sensations you want people to feel when they're either watching or listening to what you're creating.
Well, I mean, we've been doing that since the beginning of time with storytelling. It reminds me
Mhm.
of Aristotle's story structure, so that,
Yep.
you want to answer the major dramatic question in a surprising way. It's the in a surprising way, give them what they want, but it's in that surprising way that it takes them down a different journey they didn't expect.
Yep.
Okay, well, good. Thank you. I feel like I've been educated on that point.
And it's fun. It's fun. I'm writing an article right now about the ways that data science and creativity are alike, and that's, I think, one of the key pieces is that you're always answering a question. What do people want to know? And then what you're trying to do is give them that information in a way that's going to either delight them, educate them, or surprise them. Right? Um, all three of those then get people coming back for more, and it spawns a reaction of interest. And so that's how I think of data. I know a lot of people think of it as, no, you should listen to my thing. It says X number of people like blah, blah, blah do that. But that's not creativity anymore. That's actually just following the lines.
Well, that's why you're good and probably sought after for what you do, is because you can understand the creativity in data.
Yeah, I think that's where there's a trick. So hopefully there'll be one day like a group of structured creatives who all kind of have this idea and know, so we can start to really play with it. I don't think it should be an AI thing. I think that's something that's really fun and innate to people, and we can really leverage and start to make new stuff that we haven't seen before.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to my earlier question because I feel like we got off track a little bit. If a student is like, "Oh my God, that's what I want to do," where do you send them? What should they study?
Yeah.
What should they do?
I would say there are probably a couple different routes you can take. One is going into the data science route. If you really like technology and numbers, you can go into data science, and you'll really learn how to build out the numbers and the infrastructure so you can get huge amounts of data and make them into a cohesive story. Because to be honest, that's what data science is. It's all about storytelling. You need to get those numbers and figure out what they're saying and what that story is. Um, or you can actually go into the technology route. So being an engineer or programmer, because these platforms allow you to put your data out there and put your story out there. So in that route, what you get is actually the technology to be able to produce and distribute your content. But you'll also own that data on the back end to know who's watching what and where. The third option is the traditional kind of creative route, but then in that, using like social media platforms, they all have data analytics tools. So when you're putting out stuff on social media, looking at what are those numbers saying? When do people watch more? When do they watch less? How long are they watching? What happens if I do X? So it's literally you can take either way, the creative or the more scientific route, but those three approaches, from what I have seen, get people the closest to where I am right now. I had to play in all three.
Yeah, yeah. Do you think that data scientists could use more storytelling classes?
Yes, for sure. That's probably my biggest bone of contention with other people in the industry who I work with, is a lot of times they don't understand how the data is used, why it's important, and they've only been taught that this is data. You look at it in a vacuum, and then you give people results, and it's empirical and it's totally objective. Data is never objective. It's always being used for some means, right? And so I think if they understood storytelling and what they're supposed to do, um, they wouldn't have that. You'll even see it in the reports that you'll get. It's a lot of what's happening, but they never actually understand how to get to the so what. Like, yeah, okay, that's happening, but why is that happening? What can I do with that? How can I use this information? And so I think in storytelling is really where you start to learn that, oh, this is how I can use it. It starts here, but it needs to go there.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah, it almost feels like right now there's not a interdisciplinary that I know of. There's not an interdisciplinary coursework that you could do, but you could either go into the data science and learn storytelling as you go from others and from, I don't know, how the way people learn things that aren't academically based, online, YouTube, reading, all of that. Or you can go into what I say, theater, because we are the ultimate storytellers in my mind, of course. You can go into a storytelling degree, English, theater, something like that, and then learn the analytics through what you see on what you can get access to on social media and so forth. So you can kind of DIY the other portion until we have something that teaches both.
Yep.
I don't know. That's how I'm reading it anyway.
No, that's exactly what I would say. Otherwise, I mean, if you're really ambitious, you can go down both paths concurrently. That just sounds like a lot of school to me.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be interesting. Maybe if I have time, maybe I'll do a little research and see if there's a program out there that does both. But I definitely have seen more engineering type students stop by my office and say, "Hey, do you have a storytelling course?" And lots of schools don't have an actual storytelling course. They have more of, well, you should take this beginning acting class, or maybe you want to take intro to theater, or maybe you want to take a little directing, or because it's all connected. But there's definitely a movement towards, and I just heard one of the Shark Tank people said something the other day where they said they were always looking for engineers for like 20 years. I don't think it was Mark Cuban. I can't remember who said it, but it was like, we were looking for engineers for 20 years and now we're looking for storytellers. And I'm just like, oh, ding, 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 ding. That's us. How do I help my students figure out that you are in demand So yeah, cool. That's great.
Yeah, there definitely are, because even when you're building a report, I realize that telling the story is a huge way to get people to absorb the information. So if I just give you numbers, 50% of people say blah, 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 30% of people say blah, blah, blah. That means nothing. It's not compelling, right? But if I tell you, what we learned is that over time, people move from 30% to 50% because of blah, blah, blah. You're like, oh, wait a minute. And then when you do this, you get this reaction from them. So if we do more of that, then you start to hear a story. And then at the end, you're like, so long term, this is what our strategy should be. You literally create like a beginning, middle, and end of this is a number, but the number means this, and this is where we're going with it. And people will pay attention to that. And even if you can compel it, do it visually. There are times where I don't want you to see the number. Just know that this is bigger than that. It's just an image that's compelling, right?
I don't want to see the number, so you're onto something there. What do you see in your work, in your consulting work? What do you see is the biggest not pain point, what's the right word? What do people need the help with? What do digital creators need help with the most when you are consulting? Do you feel like is like their gap or the missing link?
The most common thing I would say is understanding the audience. If you don't know who you're making stuff for, then you can't. And there's so many times when people come in and they're just more creative than they need to be. They're like, no, but my vision, if they don't get it, then that's their problem. Like, that's great. You can be as creative as you want to be, but then don't expect to have an audience want to consume it. So there's a give and take there. And I get a lot of the I'm creative and I don't need to, succumb to the audience's will. And it's true, you want to do things that'll surprise the audience and you do want to be true to your creative vision. But there's also a place where if you want to get your work out there and have people see it and consume it, it has to be something that's in line with the audience you want.
I love that you say that because I get asked a lot to do, well, I guess it's called copywriting. I always say script writing, but it's copywriting. I get asked to do some writing, and I'm always up against this question is like, we want to tell the story, we wanted to, and I'll say, okay, who's your audience? Who are you trying to reach? Everyone. This is for everyone. I was like, it's never for everyone. It's not for everyone. If this is one thing I could get across is there's a target audience.
Mm-hmm.
There may be other people that find it useful and interesting, and that's awesome. But you have to know your audience. Like that is step one. So I love that you said that.
It's so important. Yeah, you have to. And sometimes you might not know who that audience is, and that's where we do our testing and stuff. Where we'll, hey, well, let's see who likes it.
It's like market research.
Yeah, it's like sometimes it's so simple as we'll just make a little test, whatever. We'll make a trailer or a piece of it or a poster, whatever it is, and see who likes it. And we're like, oh, we thought a great example. We made a comedy short. It was a romantic comedy, and we figured, okay, our audience is going to be women 18 to 49-ish. It'll be great. And it was about this woman who gets into a shared lift and she meets two guys, and the two guys are like, it's on Halloween. They're all dressed in funny costumes. And like the two guys are kind of competing to get her attention and her affections. We're thinking this will be great. And it was really funny. And then we put out the small trailer and it came back and it was men who liked it. And we were like, wait a minute,
really?
This is wrong. It can't be right. And so we're like, you know what? It must be because there were two guys and a girl. And so the guys were like kind of relating to the competition over the girl's affection. That must be. So we went back and our scriptwriter, she's amazing. She rewrote the whole thing and we did it with two women and a guy. Like, yeah, there we go. This is the audience we really think. And it came back and it was men again. And we're like, really? Wait a minute. What is it about this story that, and no matter, we did it animated, we did it live action. And every time it came back with just men. Like women watched it, but it was something that really resonated with men.
Why?
There were a couple of things that we discovered. One, we realized that online, men are willing to watch more romantic comedy kind of stuff online because you're not out in public. No one sees you. You could be anonymous, right? And it was still comedic and it still had the competitive piece that attracts so many men. So even when it was two women, it was still a competition in there, right? And it was still very comedic and the humor was very kind of brash and in your face. And even though the writer and the creator behind the series was a woman, she was like, but I wanted to get a girl's audience. I wanted it to be all women. Why is it not working? But it actually it felt very modern and the sensibilities felt more akin to what men would want to see. And so it took us a while to do that after doing literally, I think, 6 iterations of it. Like, two women and a man, animated, not animated, live action, every time.
And it just kept giving you the results, so it must be true.
Yeah, and we're like, okay, well, we've done this I don't know how many times, but then we realized, well, let's lean into that and see what happens, and that's what people wanted to see. That's what they loved. So, but we realized that it provided an outlet that men don't normally get, because you don't go and tell your guys like, hey, I'm going to go watch, Bridgerton or this romantic comedy thing. You're like, no. But if there's no one around and you're at home and it looks funny, you'll watch it.
I think if men knew how much sex was in Bridgerton, they'd probably watch it more.
Probably. The key, one of the things that I do a lot with bigger companies and even individual creators is at the very beginning, they have a concept and they want to jump to making a pilot or a trailer and then see who wants it. I'm like, no, you have a bunch of ideas. Why don't we figure out a way to prioritize those ideas based on the audience you think you can reach and the thing that you think you can actually build out and afford to do? And then we can go back and be like, well, let's make a pilot for this one. And if this one is successful, this one can fund that other one that we're not sure about. So then it becomes more strategic in how you do your creative. So you're still creative, but you just prioritize which projects you do, right? And that's something that for people who want to do it as a business, is a means to make a living. You have to consider it as a business. It can't be all creative all the time, and it doesn't have to be daunting and overwhelming either as a business. But they're just kind of like simple tricks of, well, how do I test my concept? Well, why don't you just make a poster? That's cheap. It's pretty quick, and that's the first thing people see when they're going to react. Pretend like it's a marketing campaign and pretend it's already coming out. Put that out there and see how people react. Do they want to see it? Do they not? So if you think, I went back and looked at development and how a lot of times you'll come up with a concept, you'll flesh it out, you'll write it, they'll shoot a pilot or create some sort of a proof of concept, and then you'll use that to either pitch it or sell it. And by that point, you've put a lot of time and money into it. And then if it fizzles out, you've put a lot of effort into something that you didn't get any really true value from, right? But I figured, what if we flip that on its head and start with, well, who's the audience? Where's the first place that they might come across whatever it is that you're making? And for most of us, it's going to be online. So if that's
do a lot of social media work.
Yeah, a ton. And so if that's the case, then why don't we start with the first touch point? Like they would see either a trailer or a poster or something. So why don't we start with the easiest, which is let's make a poster that tells that concept, and you have a promoted post like, hey, this new series or this new movie or whatever your concept is coming out. Sign up for the mailing list now to find out, updates for when it gets released. And then we built a baseline for how many people react to that. And the good thing is, one, you see who's interested. Two, you end up with a mailing list now of people who are interested, so that when it does come out, you can market to them. And three, you kind of get a sense for, if you do 3 versions of that, what drives them about it. You can do 3 different log lines or summaries of what the story is, and which pieces you change could be like this story arc or focusing on this character or looking at something else in it. And the one that people react to, you're like, oh, that's what really drives them. Okay, got it. So now for marketing what works. You have an audience that you can reach out to and market to later, and you kind of get a sense for how sticky your concept is before you've even shot or done anything. And then you're like, okay, as I'm developing this, now I know who I'm writing for, and I can move ahead.
Yeah. And I think the film industry has always done that in some way, but we just have tools at our hands, especially the big social media do the aggregate work.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen Social Dilemma on Netflix?
I'm torn about that one. I don't know if I can bring myself to watch it.
You should watch it. I think, personality wise, like I should have just like given up on everything and totally gone off the grid after watching it. But actually it inspired me to do more of what I'm doing because of what we know. And I was curious, since you have a little one, your feeling on it. I mean, it's not going away. We're not going to shut it down. Yeah. We can have some more security and safety around it.
It's interesting because my day-to-day is a lot of what people are talking about in the social dilemma. And so it's things that I've always been aware of. And even before Cambridge Analytica, I knew how much data was in Facebook. So I was always leery about what I put out there because I used it daily. Like, hey, we need to find someone who does X. And I knew that if people
use it as a tool.
Yeah, I used it as a tool, but I knew that people could misuse it very easily, and take it to whatever they want to do. And it gives you a lot of power and a lot of information. So I've always been very concerned about that, but it's because I work in it day in and day out, so I know it. Um, and for that very reason, even with my son, I'm very, very particular on what he can go on, what he can't.
You've got to head in that direction as he gets older.
Yeah.
Any unexpected rewards?
Yes. Interestingly enough, yesterday, for example, I don't know if I can say the names, but I was fortunate enough to sit on a call and talk to three showrunners for major shows that are currently on the air right now, and just hearing their stories of how they came up with the storylines, and they were actually willing to be incredibly vulnerable because so much of creativity is bringing in pieces of you. Even the stuff that I've written, there's every character has a piece of me in it, a personality trait or an experience or whatever it is. And hearing that, I think for me, for the first time, I've been able to connect with other creatives on an emotional level. Psychologically, creatively, technically, I could always do that. But until I had to start creating myself, and realize how much of yourself you're exposing when you do that, like cerebrally, I understood that, but until you experience it, it's not the same. And then sitting to these people who are doing shows and have really big resumes to sit down and talk and kind of tell me, like, who am I? I'm not this big name. I'm not who, why are you telling me this? But the willingness to be that vulnerable and talk about the experiences in their life has been incredibly rewarding and inspiring. And that's something I would have never imagined or even looked for before. But now I'm really, really thankful for having had the experience.
Yeah, that's cool. And I always ask this question of my guests, so I have to ask you, do you think you've made it?
I don't know. I That's a good question. I think for me, I'm going to take a step back and say yes. I think I've made it. And the way that I define that is in the fact that I can actually say now, um, wholeheartedly, that yes, I am a creative, but yes, I'm also an analytical scientist, right? It took me a really long time for people when I started doing photography and writing. People would say, "Are you a photographer?" "Oh, no, 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 no. I just do this for fun." And I would always say that. But now in business meetings, when we come in, I'm always introduced as a creative, and my business partner is the analytical guy. They don't know that we both are, but um, I would never let that moniker actually, be on my shirt or whatever at first. And now I can fully embrace it. And so to me, that's making it because I've transitioned from being afraid of that to embracing it and being able to really lean into it and enjoy the journey.
There's so much fear. There's so much fear around and so much baggage around being a creative and being an artist. And that's part of what this whole podcast is about, to try to give people the inspiration to go for it. And it is so frustrating to be on my side of this, to teach people about the fulfillment of creativity in their lives and to go for it and take risks. Because, I don't care what your career is, you should take risks because you'll
Mm-hmm.
learn and grow from that. But now to be in this moment where you hear content creator, I'm a content creator, the creatives. I mean, nobody ever talked about the creatives. I'm in a creative field. Like, artists are in the most creative field and have actually chosen it. You don't get to call yourself, I'm on a rant now, but
Yep.
you don't get to call yourself a creative just because like you went on Canva and created an image and now you're a content creator. I don't know. I guess you get to be that in this moment. But as someone who spent my whole life teaching creatives and being an actual creative artist, I don't know. You have anything to say on my rant, Damian?
No, I think that's totally fair. I mean, everyone this day calls themselves like, I have a phone and I made a video, so I'm a creative, right?
I'm
And
a filmmaker now.
yeah,
You know,
exactly. And I get that everyone has some spark of creativity, and we all can be creative in some capacity.
every
That's very true.
human, for
Um,
sure.
but I think there's a difference between someone who didn't put in the work to understand and hone their craft and someone who actually took time to learn it. Because I'll be honest, like I wrote these screenplays, but I can say it's the first screenplay that I wrote a couple months ago, but it's like 15 years, 20 years in the making. Like, I took literature classes. I had a lot of writing in college. It wasn't like I'd never written anything before. I had written prose, I had written poetry, I had written long form short novellas, and so I'd written lots of things before.
And I'm sure you
Yeah,
study that on your own as well, the DIY
exactly.
approach.
And understanding story structure, to your point earlier when we were talking about it, like I knew that okay, well, if I'm going to write a story, I have to make sure that I'm leveraging the structure, because let's be honest, everybody knows there are only so many stories being told in the world. There aren't like a million. Like you're just doing an iteration of one of the like 7 stories that have ever been told. So,
Right, right.
um, but it takes the work to do that. And so just because you want to do it doesn't mean that you've actually mastered it. And so there's a difference between mastery and dabbling and doing something for fun.
Yeah, and I'm all for dabbling. I think everybody should, everyone is creative, but it is hard. I think it's what's frustrating for me as an educator is that there are students who feel stuck, or they feel things have to be exactly right or perfect before they create. And meanwhile, there are a lot of creators who should be out there creating. Of course they are, but they're rising. And then there's some students that are conflicted with fear and that they want it to be so perfect. And I wish we could all jump in and all create at the same time, but also, value the learning approach, value that there is mastery to be had. It's not just because you can operate an iPhone and you're on social media and you have an interest. Like, you can do that, but that there's also mastery involved in it. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing. A lot of people they see the overnight success, but they don't realize that there was like 10 years to get to that overnight success, right? There's a lot of work that went into that. And so it's not, there's never anyone who's just, oh my God, I just popped up and suddenly I was really successful and everybody wanted me. There was a lot of work that went into that, whether you see it or not. It's always under the surface, and the success is just the tip of the iceberg of what you've seen. And I, the lack of respect for that is, I think, where I have a problem. I don't care if you call yourself creative, if you're doing it in the sense of, and I'm still working to improve and really hone my craft. But people who do it without the desire or the skills of mastery, really, it does kind of frustrate me, especially because I didn't start off as a creative. And I know I had, even in my creative endeavors, it comes to me easier than some people, but I still have to work. Just because it's easy doesn't mean that I'm good at it or I've mastered it, or it means I have to work my butt off to get better.
And you always do, and forever, for your whole life. But I also should say, I don't want to disparage hobbyists. I mean, I think everybody should be out there doing what makes them, what brings them joy, right? I mean, we should all be doing that. So
For sure.
we're just in a tricky moment of like amateurism versus professionalism when it comes to creation.
I think it has a lot to do with just the cultural moment of people who expect everything to come immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The immediacy of everything is kind of the driver, right? I want this now. Oh, I did it, so I must be great. And you don't necessarily get everything without.
I went viral.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just the expectation of what people are looking for is different. When you want to master something, sometimes you get too far down the mastery path and you want it to be perfect. When sometimes you need to just let it go and let it be good enough so that you can improve. Because if you don't let that good enough go and make that mistake, you don't learn that next thing that's going to make you better.
That's great. So I think you have to see it to be it. Who did you have to see in order to know that you could be doing what you're doing today?
Interestingly, mine is going to be a little bit weird. I had to see myself, actually. And I've seen a lot of people be successful and make transitions between careers, going from like something that was less creative into something creative. And I thought that was great and it was inspiring, but it never helped me to overcome the fear, because in my head, I always saw someone else doing it. It wasn't until I sat down with a friend and she said, well, why don't you close your eyes and see yourself doing that first? And if you can visualize yourself doing it, it becomes a lot easier for you to actually do it.
Oh, that's a good point. And also, when you're talking about something as pioneering as what you've been doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm all about visualization. I think you should do that anyway, but that's cool.
Yeah. So that was probably the most exciting thing. The day when I would literally in my head see myself doing it, I felt like, yes, I should do it now. This is it. I'm in.
That's great, Damian. Yeah. Envision it and then make it happen. So I like to ask recommendations of things you're reading, listening to. Do you have recommendations of your own things or things that you've gotten inspiration from recently?
Recently, a couple of weeks ago, I wrote an article that I didn't anticipate getting so much attention, but it's actually turned out to be one of the biggest. I did an interview for Authority Magazine, and I was talking about how what I'm doing is helping make the entertainment industry more diverse, and what that means. And that's something that I never thought I would be working on in my career. It just wasn't even like a blip on my radar, but it's been really useful because I realized how insulated the entertainment industry can be, because you do what everyone does. You talk to your friends, you go to your network, the people you know. So if you don't know people outside of your realm, you can't do that. And so we've been really excited to make people visible so that they can be seen, and people who you may not have seen. I had clients saying like, hey, we're looking for someone who does X, can you help us, we don't know where to find them. And I just so happen to be able to say, yes, I have, and I can tell you all about the great things that they're doing, and I can give you data around why it's performing and who their audience is. And suddenly they're like, oh wait, so they're already doing this. We don't, because you've heard this before, like, oh, but can they execute? They're not really a proven talent. But now I can come in and say, they are a proven talent. And then people
and here's
are more
the numbers.
yeah, they're willing to take a chance on that. So that's really exciting. So that article is been really great. I can send you a link to it.
Oh, please do. Yeah. So how could somebody connect with you if you offered something that they could use your services, or if they just want to reach out and follow you?
Yeah, they can email me, which is really easy. So D Taylor, DTaylor. So D Taylor at PrometheusDigitalStudio.com. It's an email. It's pretty straightforward. You can find me. Or if you want to find us on Instagram, you can go to Prometheus Digital Studio or Digital Compendium. Either one of those take you to me.
Cool. I'll link all of that in the show notes. Is there any last parting words you want to leave us with?
This has been great. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, but I love hearing kind of your thoughts and how you synthesize things. It makes me always go home and like, I'm so inspired. I want to do something else now. So hopefully your listeners are getting the same experience and really enjoyed like what little nugget I may have been able to offer.
No, I think I've been making a little bit of a shift to more storytellers in the digital space, and I think they're going to get a lot out of this episode. And I really look forward to staying connected with you. This has been, I've learned some things too, so this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Damian.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited.
Next week, we'll hear from Allison Frank. She's a casting director, member of Casting Society of America. She's been a friend for a really long time, and she will for sure be entertaining. I look forward to bringing you Allison Frank. Follow me on Instagram at Jen_Vallenga, VELLENGA. Until next week, thanks for listening.